Hey there, I have an exciting new development to share with you. So, Kinode processes can now compose with other Kinode components. So, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at this example process or this example package foo. So, if we look in our API, we're going to see our standard WIT file. And in this WIT file, we can, or this is a API WIT file rather. So previously you were able to export types. Well, now you can see here we export in addition a function. And we export it in this API world right here. So we then can go implement that. So if we go look over in let's see here, foo API, then we can see the implementation of this function. So you'll notice that the world here is the one that we defined over here that exports this this interface, and namely the thing that we care about exports this function myfunc, and we can see this is slightly different, but pretty similar syntax to how we define our normal processes. But here we define our function. This is just kind of a dummy function that just takes in a Boolean and returns that same Boolean. Okay, so we can now define functions in one file, export them as part of the API, and what you'll notice here is that we import the same interface, this foo interface, which has this myfunc. And so if we go look at our, let's look at our, chat, slightly modified chat process here. Here we import myfunc. Just like we would import a type, now we can import this function. And if we go down, we actually use it here in this print line. So we print begin and then the value of myfunc evaluated on true, which is just true. So what's going to happen here when we actually run this? What's going to happen is we're going to, so let's go in and build this thing. So we have a fake node running here on the left, and then on the right here, I'm going to build and start this package. So we've defined our API that defines the function here, just like any other process, but it's slightly different than the process like we saw. It didn't define the init. Instead, it just defined our API functions. This thing gets built and composed with our process foo, and then when we start it, we can indeed import and run that that function that was exported in this API. So that's pretty cool. But the real power here comes from, we can now go check out another process. So let's look at, or another package. Let's look at bar. Okay, so bar here, we have, let's look at our API and let's look at our metadata. So here we have defined as a dependency this foo package that we just deployed and saw that it exports it has an API that exports a function. So we set a dependency upon that package, and now over here on the left in our API, we don't just import our interface bar, we also import foo. So what's going to happen is when we build this, we're going to pull down that WIT file, but not just the WIT file, but also the API that exports the functions, which is a WASM component, and that's going to be composed with our bar process. So let's look at our bar process. It's effectively the same as our foo process. It's slightly different because we have this bar interface, but we also have this foo interface because we're importing foo, we're importing myfunc, and then if we look, we're just going to do the same thing, right? We're just going to print, let's change it up, let's make it print false, okay. But so what's going to happen here now is we're going to build and compose this thing, We're going to compose it with the functions exported by the foo API. So if we do, let's do a kit build, and then we'll start it as well. Yeah, so pkg directory not found. Oh, right. Okay, so this is me giving an incorrect command. So we need to run it in our current directory. Okay, so we build, we pull down from this node the API that's been defined by foo. We compose with that API, and now when we run, we can call that function that's defined elsewhere, namely in the API of foo. We can call that in bar. So this is a very trivial example that just shows that it's working, but what does this unlock? Like, what's the point of all this? The point of all this is now you can do things like you can define a standard library, say in Rust or C or some fast language, compile that to WASM, to a WASM component, and now other libraries, or other processes can import those functions and call those functions. So now, rather than just having a Rust process library, we can have a generic process library that any language Kinode process can import and use those functions. It also unlocks some really nice sort of modular opportunities, modularization opportunities. So for example, let's say that you want to develop an application that needs to transfer files. Well, there is a file transfer application that has already been written, and one of the pieces of that file transfer application is a worker, a file transfer worker. So the application itself, the logic is handled in one process, and then when that process actually wants to transfer a file, as opposed to do things like serving an HTTP interface, it will go and spin up a worker to do that file transfer. So this pattern of spinning up the worker to do the file transfer, you can use that in your application by copying that file transfer worker over to your application and using it for your purposes. But it's kind of annoying because you have to go and find the repo, and you have to pull down the repo, and you have to copy the correct files into the right places. Well, here you can wrap the spawning of that worker, the running of that worker inside a function. And now I can distribute what is more like a library that just has a function that's, transfer file. And behind the scenes, what's going to happen is it's going to send a message to that file transfer worker and spawn that file transfer worker and use that worker to transfer the file. But it's because we have this infrastructure built out now to distribute these API components, it's just going to be much easier to import. So these are just a couple of the sort of initial things that we have in mind for how composition is going to be useful, and we're looking forward to seeing what else people come up with. So, hop by the Discord and let's chat, because we want to hear your ideas too.